I was thinking recently about, of all the things I've tried to do to grow, what's been most useful? Well, number one on the list was a Google search on whatever the topic du jour was. But um, second was co-mentoring. Maybe 10 years ago, I had heard of this, and I asked a friend if we would do the equivalent of I'll show you mine if you show me yours, but not sexually. We would agree to talk. We tried it one time first for a half hour. In the first 15 minutes, he would raise some issue that he wanted my input on or to kick around with me. And then in the second 15, we'd switch roles and I'd bring up some issue and that we'd kick around. Anyway, it proved useful. I wouldn't say it changed my life, but it was useful enough and fun enough that I decided to try it with somebody else. And long story short, now roughly a decade later, I have 6 of these ongoing little co-mentorings. They're all the same in that we meet for a half hour by telephone because it's really convenient. I can be in my underwear or whatever. Once a month, and we just do it the same way. First 15 minutes, he or she says something that he wants to talk about, and we chat about it. And then in the second 15 minutes, and we don't have a stopwatch, but roughly. Then we switch roles. And it's fun and easy. And as I said, as I look back on all the efforts I've done, I've read a ton of books and articles and had some counseling and young religious training and I've got a PhD, so I've had a hell of a lot of courses, and it was in educational psychology, so supposedly I should have grown something from that. I've grown some, but I mean, if I look at number one and number two, really it is the Google searching and then reading those articles that came from a Google search near the top of the search results, very, very potent and current, amazing. But number two was this co-mentoring thing, so I thought I would share with you some thoughts about it. First of all, you might ask a couple of questions like, why by phone? It's just too convenient. As I said, people, especially now that with COVID opening up, the traffic is going to resume its strangulating self. Maybe strangulating is a little hyperbolic, but certainly reducing our mobility. And it's just convenient to not have to hop in the car and meet. Now, I understand that there are going to be some people who just feel better about, face-to-face. There is this ineffable magic that occurs, the chemistry that occurs when people are face-to-face. But at least among the 6 people that I do this co-mentoring with, we tried getting together one time in person, but didn't feel it was worth it. We went right back. We tried also video conferencing for a while, and just didn't feel it was worth it. We felt better, we're going to scratch our butts while we're doing it. We didn't want to be seen, and it was just as, and it's also easier to get on. Zoom is amazing. It's wonderful, but there is some coordination and, making sure everything works right. Whereas with the phone, you just pick it up and make the call. So, and with cordless phones, you can walk around. Unlike with Zoom, where I tend to have to sit in front of my computer screen, with a phone, I can walk around. So that's why the phone. Why one-on-one? Of course, if it was a group and not just co-mentoring, we'd get much more input from 4, 5, 6 people. But generally, I would say more than generally, I've absolutely found that the benefit of whatever benefit I would get from having 5 or 6 people's input is outweighed by the fact that I get to talk about my issue half the time in a one-on-one relationship. And of course, my co-mentor gets to do the same. So it ends up being, I feel, more beneficial. Now, who could be your co-mentoring person? It certainly could be a good friend. It could be a colleague. It does, we normally think of mentoring as being an older person with a younger person. Absolutely not necessary. You could be the same age. You could be very different ages. If you're co-mentoring, believe me, there's a lot that a young person could teach an old person as well as vice versa. You could be diverse in demographically or the same. On the one hand, they say diversity is our greatest strength. On the other hand, they're all saying birds of a feather flock together. There's no rules. Pick one or more people. And you don't have to do it, no major commitment. You try it for an hour and see what happens. Try it for a half hour and see what happens. Time. You might say, when do we do this? Well, it could be any time. I tend to do it either first thing in the morning or right before dinner or right after dinner or on a Saturday morning. And the half-hour thing, there's nothing sacrosanct about that, but that has really worked better than an hour. It's a nice small amount of commitment, yet 15 minutes, amazing. If you have that amount of time delimited, you know you got to do your half in roughly 15 minutes. It's amazing how much you can accomplish in 15 minutes. Otherwise, as they say, the work expands to fill the time allotted. What else? I don't know if I should. I've had now a number of these co-mentoring relationships for years now that have stayed. So that's a good sign that we both find it useful and fun. Now I want to talk a little bit about reluctance to ask. A lot of people are reluctant to ask for for co-mentoring because they're afraid of imposing. They're afraid that they have nothing to contribute. They maybe don't want to reveal their stuff. They'd rather keep it in. I can only say that you can mitigate some of that by the way you ask. And it would be easy for me to do a role play if I was pretending that I was talking to a great friend. But let's make it harder on me. Let's pretend that it is somebody who I don't even know well. He's a coworker or she's a coworker at work. And I don't know her very well. But here's how I might pitch it so that I wouldn't feel so self-conscious. At the end of the staff meeting, let's say it's a Zoom meeting, I might say to this person, hey, would you mind staying on the call for a minute after everybody goes? I want to ask you something. And then afterwards I say something like, your comment about X in the meeting reminded me of, that I really respect you. I just heard of this thing called co-mentoring, in which once a month for a half hour, you get together by phone or whatever, and the first 15 minutes, one person brings up an issue that they want to discuss and kick it around. And then in the second 15 minutes, roughly, the other person goes and tells what they would like to talk about and got that kicked around. I'm wondering if you might like to try it one time. So, that informal tone, it doesn't imply that there's going to be any major commitment. We talked about trying it. It's, I use words like kick around. So it just doesn't feel like there's a lot of pressure. Whether I will work for you or not, who the heck knows? But at least that's how I think might be worth trying. You're not presenting yourself as an expert or as a loser who has nothing to contribute. It's kind of in the middle, Okay. Now I want to talk about how I actually do them. They vary a little bit, but typically what happens is, the time of the call, we'll have, a minute, 30 seconds of little small talk, little jokes, whatever, or nothing. Sometimes I'll just go right into saying, well, so, what would you like to ask or talk about today? And then I listen really well. I try to listen really well. I try to not interrupt, but you'll see in a moment, I'll explain why I sometimes do. Especially because we got that 15-minute time limit. Very often we can get more accomplished if I am judicious in knowing when to interrupt. So I'm listening really carefully, not only to what is said, but what's underneath what's said, tone of voice. It's amazing, even though it's audio, if you're listening carefully and you're listening to their changes of their volume, of their pace, their intonation, you can feel what's really going on. Not always, but you can if you really pay attention. And like I said, sometimes I will. Now I've chosen people who are not particularly long-winded, so I don't need to interrupt for that reason. But sometimes I hear the person I know. I'm really quite confident. I know where they're going with what they're saying, and if I have a good idea, I'll let them say, "Hey, I have an idea. I'm wondering what you think of this." Now they may say, "Let me finish," or they may I may hear in their voice some impatience. In which case, I'll apologize. Say, "I'm sorry. Please continue." But that interruption, the general injunction against interrupting is too black and white as far as I'm concerned. It should be nuanced. Yes, toward not interrupting. But there is a time when the wiser thing is to interrupt. And that's also going to be culturally variant. In some cultures, interrupting is seen as inordinately rude. And in others, it's the normative way that people interact. So you can't make these black and white generalizations. Interrupt, don't interrupt. It really is situational to the person. And how confident you are that the interruption will not derail them from saying something important that you needed to hear before you shared your pearls of wisdom. Okay, so after that, I will typically before I jump to any suggestions, I will usually ask a follow-up question for more detail, clarification, whatever. And then I default to asking, so now that you've explained the problem yourself, as you know, ideas are best when they come from the person, not from me, because you know yourself better than I do. Is there anything come to mind as to what you should do about the situation? That's a kind of typical thing I would say. But if I sense, or they explicitly say, no, I really want your advice here, I'll say, okay. And I still won't jump on that and, give them advice. But I'll say, I'll try to couch it, because again, you want to really preserve people's self-esteem and increase their investment in what you're proposing. So you might say, well, in listening to you say this and this, I'm wondering if it might be a good idea to do X. What do you think? That kind of couching. In listening to you about X, I'm wondering whether, and then you make your suggestion tentatively, and then ending with those 4 powerful words that J.W. Marriott, the founder of the Marriott chain, said are the most powerful words in the English language. What do you think? And so we'll kick around, and of course I'm listening very carefully to what the person said. If they are, disagreeing or whatever, I'm going to try to not get defensive. I might sometimes push back one more time if I feel they misunderstood. But generally, I'm going to default to saying, oh, that's important. And then I will either say, do you have a better counter-suggestion? Or I'll come up with a counter-suggestion. And we go back and forth until it runs out. Now, sometimes that takes the full 15 minutes, and sometimes it takes just 3 or 5 or 7. We use, roughly that 15 minutes. And then usually that the person whose topic we've been talking about is almost always gracious enough to say, well, great, I'm happy to turn it over to you now. And then I will hold forth on some issue. And again, the issues can range very widely, from career to relationships to money to the meaning of life. And so, we'll talk about any of those kind of things. And again, there are some people who want to be much deeper, and others who want to be more superficial. There's no rules about this. That's just fine. Okay. So I'll share, and then when I'm on sharing my idea, my focus is going to be on concise clarity, and then not being defensive. There's a natural tendency if somebody else, and the person I'm co-mentoring with may not have my kind of counseling-ish orientation of trying to get the ideas to come from me. So they're very often going to offer advice, and that's people's natural tendencies to get defensive. Well, I'm going to work hard to not get defensive, and listen really well, even if the tone isn't great, which it usually is because the people I would choose to co-mentor with have good tone. They're not intense like me, and I will listen well, and then I might ask a follow-up question or agree. And if I do agree, of course, I'm going to thank them. I say, good idea, I'm going to act on that. And whenever I get an idea, either from them or it comes from me, sometimes in my explaining my problem, I come up with my own idea, which is great. I will tend to jot it down so that I don't forget it, because so often we get ideas and life begins to, intrude as soon as the session is over, and voila, with each passing minute, the idea fades further into the recesses of our mind, and voila, we haven't accomplished a thing, and by the next month, who knows? So that's it basically. And then at the very end of each session, I would say, okay, you want to propose a couple of possible times for us when we're going to do it again, and that's that. And then we end crisply. Have a good week or have a good month or whatever. Now, lest I be seen as somebody who is absolutely sold on all this, I want to express my reservation, but I first should let you know you're listening to How to Do Life. I'm Marty Nemko, and the podcast is available on Apple and on I think it's Pandora, or is it what's the other one it's at? I should know this. I should know Spotify, right? So it's on Spotify. Anyway, I'm going to take a break for just 15 or 30 seconds. Stay with me. Thank you for staying with me. Too often people who are recommending anything, especially in the self-help or how-to space, they paint things too positively. So before I ended this paean to co-mentoring, I thought I would share my reservations. There's only really one major one. Even though on reflection, it feels like the second most useful tool that I've used to help grow, next to, as I said, those Google searches on the whatever my problem du jour is, problem of the day. I remain unconvinced how much people change. Have I changed radically from all these years of co-mentoring? No. I've kind of enjoyed it. I've enjoyed helping the other person a lot. I probably have gained some stuff. Although if you put a gun to my head, I'd have a hard time saying exactly how much and what specifically. And I would think especially if people are not great listeners, great questioners, and maybe tend to either give too much advice too quickly, or they let their personality get in the way of being truly objectively, truly helpful. Instead of trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person, they stay residing in their own value system. So for those reasons, I can't say this is going to be your magic pill. There are no magic pills, not even yet for COVID, let alone in these soft areas of personal growth or professional growth. So I want to just say that I think it's definitely worth a try. It's worth asking for feedback from especially at the end of your first session or second session. Ask each other for feedback on what worked and what didn't work in the way in which you implemented the co-mentoring, and you can therefore keep improving not only in how you interact with each other, but those kind of skills that you're using in co-mentoring are applicable very broadly. Co-mentoring and its variants and those skills could be useful if you are having conversations with your romantic partner about how to grow the relationship, or if you are supervising somebody, or I happen to know somebody who uses peer supervision of career counselors, somebody who runs the Asia Pacific Career Development Association, and they have not bosses mentoring or supervising younger people, but peers. And the concept of co-mentoring that I've tried to run down for you here, she says are quite applicable. And I think that's all I want to say. I think I'll just give a brief summary. So co-mentoring it's very empowering. It's free, by the way, also. I haven't mentioned that, but of course it's free. It's very egalitarian. It's not hierarchical. It's one person and another, and you're splitting the time roughly 50-50. So it's, there's no, when you see a professional counselor, you surrender your power to the great spirit on high, the great expert. In co-mentoring, it's very empowering. I've stressed the use of phone because having tried it all kinds of ways, most people, including me, find that whatever benefits would accrue from being in person or even video are dwarfed by the freedom and flexibility to be able to walk around on the phone. It's so easy to get on the call when you're just making a phone call, even compared to Zoom. One-on-one is great because you get half of the time, unlike in a group of 6 or 8 people, where you may only get a sixth or an eighth of the time for your issue. You're getting, in a one-on-one, you're getting attention half the time, which is awesome. And it's awesome, in my judgment, more valuable than the input you would have gotten from the other people, especially if you've chosen your one-on-one partner well. As I said, who your co-mentoring partner or partners, you could have a number of these one-on-one relationships like I do. They can be people who are in your field, at your level of employment. They could be much younger, they could be much older, they could be of the same race, gender, sexual orientation, it could be different. They all can work. In fact, I want to make a brief pitch for the value of somebody different. I mean, if I am a scientist, I have I'm in my silo, I have my worldview. And if I want to get somebody's perspective on maybe the next experiments I'm going to do, there's value, of course, to talking to somebody who knows my field really well. But I might get some value from an outside perspective, somebody who is, maybe just a psychotherapist, but nonetheless has got a good mind, because that is important. It's really important your co-mentor have these attributes: kindness, intelligence, responsibility, and yes, not being too impulsive and too advice giving, willingness to listen, to ask questions, and then tentatively ask advice. But it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody from your field. Time can be very flexible, whether it could be every day for a while. It could be a 15-minute check-in every day, or on the other end of the extreme, it could be once a quarter for an hour. It could be in a weekday evening before dinner, after dinner, Saturday morning, whatever. During lunch break, time could be any time, of course. With regard to being reluctant to ask, you're not selling yourself as an expert, but you're not presenting yourself as a basket case. You're just saying, hey, I heard about this thing, and it might be mutually beneficial, and it's certainly low risk. Hey, you want to try one time getting together for a half hour, the first 15 minutes, you tell me what's going on, that some topic you want to talk about in your professional or personal life, and then the second 15 minutes we simply reverse roles. That's not putting a lot of pressure on you, and people are going to be flattered to be asked. So I described how I run these sessions. Normally, after just a few seconds of a bit of small talk, I start by saying, "So, what would you like to talk about today?" And then I listen my butt off, and then usually ask a follow-up question, and then ask if the person has got some idea to how to solve it themselves. It's much better if I can get the idea to come from them, and if not, I will tactfully and tentatively raise as a question, might you want to try this? And again, I don't say it's the magic pill, but co-mentoring is certainly worth trying. The price is certainly right. In any event, so that's today's episode of How to Do Life. I do thank you for watching. I always welcome your comments, your thumbs up ratings, thumbs down. It is available on Spotify and on iTunes. If you're not watching it directly on the YouTube video, of course. And of course, I welcome if you subscribe to whatever, the YouTube or the iTunes thing or whatever. But in any event, I like to end every show with this because I really believe it, especially in these times. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.